You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Here's your host, Chris Voss. Wait, is that me? Hey, guys, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Chris Voss Show, the chrisvossshow.com. I always get that thing, like it comes up and says, here's your amazing host, Chris Voss, and I sit there just going, who is it this time? Anyway, guys, we have an amazing author on the show, and he's got a hot new book that's out. We're going to be talking to him about it in the Supreme Court, or some people call it SCOTUS. That's Supreme Court of the United States, I believe is what that stands for. Or for other people, it's just a church. Anyway, we'll get into what that's about and all that good stuff. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. That's what we do on the improv at the beginning of the show. Chris just rambles about something. That's what one of my authors from France, from I think Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, called it. He goes, you do a ramble every show. Anyway, you guys know the ramble. Part of the ramble is to refer the show to your friends and family. Sit down with them and, sit down with them and show them that in your will, you've given up all your estate to the Chris Voss Show. and that they're not going to get anything from your estate unless they subscribe to the Chris Voss Show. This is a horrible ramble I'm doing at the improving today. And that if they ever want to receive any inheritance from you, they must subscribe to the Chris Voss Show. So tell them to go to youtube.com where it says, don't do that. Don't do that. Go to youtube.com where it says Chris Voss. Go to goodreads.com where it says Chris Voss. Go see the big LinkedIn group, the LinkedIn newsletter, and all that stuff we do on LinkedIn. Go see us on TikTok. We're trying to get cool over there. Not sure it's working, but we're getting a few thousand views. Maybe we'll get cool. Maybe we won't. I don't know. One thing I do want to make an announcement. I'm told that this morning we should have Gordon Sondland booked on the show. His new book coming out October 25th, The Envoy, Mastering the Art of Diplomacy with Trump and the World. You may remember Gordon. He was the ambassador to the European Union who testified at the Trump thing. And he's written a book, and it's going to be a tell-all. So it'll be interesting to have him on the show as well. But last but not least, or first but not least, because he's first on the show, we have an amazing author on the show today. He's the author of the newest book that just came out September 27th, 2022, American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. I've thrown so much energy to be in the show. Andrew Seidel is on the show with us. Andrew, help me get that last name correct.
Andrew Seidel, and thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for coming on. Andrew Seidel is on the show with us today. He's going to be talking to us his amazing book. Sometimes I throw so much energy at the beginning of the show, so the brain goes, woohoo, right out the window, which, you guys have been here for 13 years. You've seen that movie. Anyway, he is on the show, and it's going to be amazing to talk to him and get some insights, especially for what's coming up for the coming election. He is a constitutional and civil rights attorney, the author of 2 books, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, and this newest one, American Crusade. He's also co-editor of an academic text, Law and Religion, Cases and Materials, 5th edition, with Professor Leslie Griffin of the UNLV, Las Vegas Law School. He is a senior correspondent at Religion Dispatches, a prolific author of op-eds and scholarly articles. I'm learning to talk today, evidently. He organized and contributed to the groundbreaking report, Christian Nationalism at the January 6, 2021 insurrection, which is published by the Baptist Joint Committee and FFRF, which aroused congressional interest. He's appeared on Fox News to debate Bill O'Reilly. I got to go watch that. MSNBC and hundreds of other media outlets. And he's the VP of Strategic Communications at Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, the largest organization fighting for the founding principle. Remind me to subscribe and donate. He has a BS in neuroscience and several law degrees, each with honors and awards. And before dedicating his life and law degree to keeping state separate, he was a Grand Canyon tour guide, an accomplished nature photographer. I don't know even know how you went from there to there. You need to explain how you decided to go from a tour guide, nature photographer, to being an attorney who just sues the fuck out of everyone.
That was like my gap year. It was like
That's your gap year.
Myself. Yeah.
That was your finding yourself journey there.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, welcome to the show, Andrew. We really appreciate it. And tell us where people can find you on the interwebs. Any .coms or Twitter handles, whatever you want.
I'm AndrewLSeidel.com, Andrew L. Seidel on all of the socials. And yeah, please subscribe to Americans United for Separation of Church and State, AU.org. We need all the support we can get these days.
I'm an atheist. I can probably get behind that, right? Because that's
I mean, really, the separation of state and church is for everybody. Really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of an important thing.
Yeah.
In fact, it's the only way to guarantee religious freedom.
And regardless of what Boebert says, it's in the Constitution, actually. In the Founding Fathers. I'm even as an atheist, I'm for people. If you want religion to go through your life, just keep it off my lawn, man. Don't wave it in my face. Yeah. What motivated you want to write this second book on this topic?
Well, I've been watching the Supreme Court for a decade, and I've been watching it pervert religious freedom, because religious freedom has long been this shield, right? That this hallowed protection against an overreaching government, the minority's protection against the tyranny of the majority. And that's not true anymore. And it's not true anymore because of this Supreme Court, and because there's this well-funded and powerful network of Christian nationalist organizations and judges. I mean, we're talking like $1 billion
Federalist Society.
Yeah, a huge part of it, right? Spent $500 million packing our courts. And one of the things they're working to do is to weaponize the First Amendment. And I mean that quite literally. They're trying to turn that protection of religious freedom enjoyed by all into a weapon of supremacy and power and privilege for the chosen few.
And I'm not one of them. Damn it.
You're not one of them, no. Unless you are a conservative white Christian dude, you're not going to benefit from this crusade. No.
Damn it! I need to join a new club. This atheist club isn't working out. There's no money in it. So, give us an overview of the book. What goes into it, and just kind of a bird's eye view, if you would.
Yeah. So these crusaders are litigating the legal meaning of religious freedom as a constitutional right in case after case. And in the process, they're redefining that protection. And they bring cases that we are told, and that superficially seem to be about a Christian cross, or about the surface of a kid's playground, or about private school vouchers, or a gay wedding cake. Or a coach that just wants to pray. But really, they're about supremacy and power. They're literally about privileging the right, air quotes, kind of conservative Christian over everybody else. And so I tell the story of this decades-long campaign to forge this weapon in American Crusade. And I genuinely do not think you can understand what is happening in this country right now, from our politics to our culture to our courts to our law, without understanding this attack. And go ahead.
And this is why I love books like yours and authors like yourself that write these books, because a lot of people don't understand. They just think that one day, SCOTUS got up and decided to overturn Roe versus Wade. That's the age we're living in. If you're watching this 10 years from now. And we have an election coming up that's going to be a fight over the House and Senate. But people don't realize, like you mentioned, and we talk about in the book, this is a decades long thing. This is 40, 50, 60 years in the making of trying to do this. I thought it was interesting and probably appropriate that you use the words crusade and crusaders. What motivated you to use that language?
I mean, it really is a religious crusade. I mean, they're not seeking to conquer land, but they are seeking to conquer our Constitution and remake it in their image. I mean, really what they are trying to do is fashion America as a Christian nation, that nation that it was not founded as, which that's the subject of my first book, but which they want it to be. And so, I mean, that phrase was chosen deliberately. And, so I discuss one of the cases in each chapter of the book. And then I introduce you to the crusader groups that make up this network as they litigate the other sides of these cases, right? And usually the group was started by a white Christian man, often with early race. Early racist and homophobic leanings.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Sometimes they have early ties to James Dobson. People might know his name. He's an anti-LGBTQ white Christian with early racist and eugenics leanings. So that's
weird how they're all the same that way. I don't know what's going on there.
Like Koch brothers seed money is pretty typical. Cash infusions from the DeVos Empire also typical. And really, I mean, the key for me was I have lived these cases. This fight has been my whole career, right? I've litigated some of them. I've briefed others. I have been on the front lines defending our country from this assault. And so American Crusade tells the true stories behind these Supreme Court cases, and it draws back the curtain on this assault and ties it all together, because I think too often we treat these cases as just a one-off, not realizing that they fit into this much larger assault on our democracy.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, most of these groups that you write of in the book and talk about, this has been their target, their bullseye for a long time, is to stack the courts, to create enough, is tort law the right word? To create enough precedent and law to where they can stack enough of these different cases that they can set enough precedent to where we become a Christian nation. I mean, they got really smart at this. They're like, we don't need to elect better HOA managers. We need to elect people in SCOTUS and stuff. And I love the word you use, crusade. And so this is basically another Christian crusade. By blunt force on SCOTUS, just without all the murdering, at least so far. I
mean, I think there's two important points to note on that. And first is that, yes, they did pack the courts, and now these justices are completely allied with the crusade. And you can see, and this is a through line in the book, they are eager and ready to take these cases. They want to hear these cases. The Supreme Court typically rejects between 97 and 99% of the cases that come its way. But it decides almost every religious freedom case that comes its way, and decides them in favor of conservative Christianity. And really, the inescapable fact is that this Supreme Court wants to decide these cases. And the second thing that I think is so important, which you mentioned, is that, and this is one of the harder truths that American Crusades, at least a harder truth for a lot of people, is that these ultra conservative justices are crusaders too, and that is why they were put on the court. So you jokingly invoked the Federalist Society earlier. Leonard Leo, who ran the Federalist Society, is universally recognized as the guy who orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court. And I have a quote in the book from a former employee who described Leo's mission like this, quote, "He figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception. Conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the courts." And so that's what they did.
Yeah. And people don't realize, basically, for the most part, I think the Federalist Society, you know this better than I do, so this is more of a question, but I think the Federalist Society, they hand the president, or people like Trump, a portfolio of some of the most extremist, conservative, and, like you mentioned, crusaders that they can put onto the court. And they've been doing this for decades. You see the idiocy of the Florida judge who she was advised by everybody, including I think the body of attorneys, to not have her put on as a federal bench.
Unqualified.
Totally unqualified. And you see how much the appellate courts have taken apart her ruling so far. Will probably get worse. You've seen the Clarence Thomas thing. He spoke of perverts on the SCOTUS thing. Clarence Thomas, excuse me. Sorry, I had a cough there. And you see what's going on. He just recently he's helping, give a pass to Lindsey. I'm going to say Lindsey Graham. Is it Lindsey Graham? Do I have the right Lindsey? I don't know what's going on today, where he doesn't have to testify in that in the the court case there in Georgia. It's really getting weird, especially with him and his wife and January 6th and the crazy stuff she was putting out. And, she's trying to convince everybody that, like, he has no idea what we're talking about. And it's like, you guys seem to rule the same way, though. You guys seem to be on the same side. So, what's going on there? It's crazy.
Yeah. So I get into a lot of that in the book, and I already actually have an update available for free to everybody who's bought the book on the website, because we're learning more and more about the court and about the corruption at the court, especially as it relates to Ginny and Clarence Thomas.
Yeah.
I will say the Lindsey Graham thing is just be too deep to get into the weeds, but that one doesn't bother me as much yet. I do think it looks terrible, and I think that's a problem for the court, but the whole court is likely going to weigh in on that one, though. That's not that's cold comfort too. But, think about what Leo's former employee was confessing, right? The whole is they have an anti-democratic mission, right? Like if they didn't stack the court, majority would rule. If they didn't stack the court, democracy would work. Right? They had to figure out a way to enshrine minority rule. And so Leo's groups, the Federalist Society, Judicial Crisis Network, we know they spent $540 million packing the court from 2014 to 2020. And so that includes blocking Merrick Garland, getting Gorsuch on the court, getting Kavanaugh on the court over credible accusations, then jamming Amy Coney Barrett in at the last minute, right? Yeah. And this summer, the news broke that Leo's newest group raised $1.6 billion. That's billion with a B.
Those are the guys with the highest raised PAC ever, right?
Yeah. I mean, but that's also more than $1 billion more than they spent capturing the court.
Holy crap!
And the reason I think this is crucial is because Leo's job at the Federalist Society. You mentioned that he was providing portfolios of judges. That's correct. The short lists of judges that Trump announced. The names that he announced, those were written by Leo. And Leo's job was described for judicial nominees as the, quote, monitor of the nominee's ideological purity.
Wow.
Right. And we know he is responsible for the confirmation of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. All right, that's 5 votes. Justice Thomas is an old friend of Leo's. There's actually a video from a recent Federalist Society event of them joking on stage about how Leo's the 3rd most powerful man in America, right? All 6 of those justices were or are members of the Federalist Society. So, I mean, that's 6 votes on the Supreme Court. And Leo personally chose 5 of them for their ideology. And it's a crusader ideology. That's why they were picked.
Yeah. And you see, I mean, Trump, of all the times to get, I think, what was it, 4 judges he got? Was it 3 or 4? 3. And I think probably more judges than, I don't know, what, Clinton? Or
3 and 4 years is a remarkable run.
Yeah, it's to get that many judges thrown onto the thing, and of course, as highly embraced as he was of the Christian nationalism. What people don't realize is when you study fascism or religious history, even when you look at Russia right now, Russia pulls this war off by going to the church, the Russian Orthodoxy, and who's a billionaire too. He's probably got some of his money parked over there from Putin. And gets the blessing of the church. And this is how fascism rises. This is how authoritarian rises. The few, religion's been dying off in America for the past 10, 20 years. It took a huge dip with the Gen Zers. And they're trying to do a clawback. And they figure out the best way to do it is to stack the court, take the court. And, now they're trying to steal elections. So it's just the death by 1,000 cuts.
Well, you're absolutely right. This was one of the things that I really wanted to answer in American Crusade too, was I wanted to answer why. Why the Crusade? Why are Christian nationalists seeking this weapon? And you're right. I mean, it's largely a backlash against equality realized and against changing demographics. Right. So conservative white Christian American status as the dominant group is threatened, and it has been for some time. They're losing the culture wars, as Leo's former employee admitted. They're losing the deference which they believe their religion is due. And if you want a really great example of this, go listen to Justice Sam Alito's gloating speech that he gave at a religious freedom forum in Rome in July, which was just after he overturned Roe versus Wade. It's all about how his religion is not being given the deference it's due.
Wow.
And we know that when the dominant group or caste in a society feels threatened or left behind by circumstances, that it reacts or overreacts by seeking a way to retain that status. Mm-hmm. And that is why we are seeing them turn to Christian nationalism and turn to violent insurrection to overthrow a free and fair election, turning to these so-called strongmen. But it's also why we are seeing them weaponize religious freedom at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and it always ends in violence. It's violence. It's power seized by violence. You can go back to every fascist authoritarian rule, and then violence to stay in power. And that's why we're seeing, all this language. I mean, people don't realize what's going on, but there's all this language that comes out from these right-wing politicians and even like news people on Fox. And, there's talking about violence and seizing violence and, this sort of Russian language that they use with where they go, those people are pedophiles, they're eating babies, they're killing babies. It gives them, oh, well, if they're killing babies, we have a right to react by violence. And it's all a pattern of history. If you study what's gone on in history with the rise of fascism and authoritarianism, it's all seated in this right-wing religion where usually, I think Ruth Ben-Gate wrote, we've had her on the show, she wrote the book Strongmen and talked about how all of these leaders rise in profile. They rise with religious white nationalism, taking back, seizing power again.
It's a huge part of it. My first book, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, I look at the previous waves of Christian nationalism that our country has endured. Because Trump, one of the best predictors, probably the best predictor of a Trump voter in 2016 was whether or not that person believed the United States was founded as a Christian nation. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's basically the definition of Christian nationalism. So that was the best indicator of a Trump voter in that election. And he successfully tapped into this undercurrent of Christian nationalism that had not risen to the surface, but which he then brought forth. But we'd seen previous waves throughout our history, and it was during times of fear and strife and violence, like during the 1950s, the Red Scare. I have a chapter on that in The Founding Myth. Actually, in the lead up to the Civil War, and during the Civil War itself, we saw a small wave rise up in 1863 and 1864, and that's when you get things like "In God We Trust" added to our coinage for the first time. And then in the 1950s, you get all kinds of stuff like the National Day of Prayer, "In God We Trust" put on paper money, "Under God" added to the Pledge of Allegiance, all this stuff. And what is really happening is what you're talking about, Christian nationalists taking advantage of these times of national fear and crisis to impose their religion on a country that is essentially otherwise preoccupied with surviving a crisis.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking earlier in the green room about Greg Locke, and I watched this. What's the channel that I subscribe to? Right Wing Watch.
Yeah, Right Wing Watch.
Hard to say without screwing it up. And I watch the preachers that are on there, and they're preaching about violence. They're basically political rallies. Like I'm like, do you guys ever talk about Jesus in that Bible thing? There was some stuff there you used to talk about, and they just look like political rallies now. And you're just like, you get tax-free benefits from this?
Yeah, this is one of the things I discuss at the end of American Crusade is how Christian nationalism and right-wing politics are wrapped up in this feedback loop where it's difficult to know now. It's a chicken and egg thing. You don't know which came first, really. And a really good example. Essentially, the religion drives the politics, and the politics drives the religion, is what I'm saying. But you can't necessarily tell where each begins. A good example, though, of where you can see the politics driving it was during the pandemic, right? Where you have all of a sudden all of these churches and religious groups challenging mask mandates and vaccines. And it's not because there was some new scripture discovered which said don't get vaccinated or don't wear a mask.
Jesus said that, though.
I don't remember that in the Beatitudes.
It was in Revelations when the beast rises from the thing. Beast had a mask on. No, I'm just kidding. But
But there's nothing new that was discovered. It was Trump and the conservative politicians failed miserably in their response to the pandemic. And so they had to figure out, there was this visceral response to it. Well, we can't let that happen. So you have the politics then driving religion, and then they're claiming, well, I'm made in God's image, so I can't wear a mask, which, I mean, it makes no sense. You have Catholic schools in the United States challenging these mask mandates, and then the Pope saying, no. It's really amazing. So I get into some of that in the end of American Crusade. It's more of a sidebar, but
it's almost like everything is an excuse to create precedent and law to just empower, strengthen, codify religion as more and more of us being a religion nation. It's just amazing to me how many people haven't read the Constitution. Like when Lauren Boebert goes running around saying it's not in the Constitution, or the Constitution says, there should be no separation of religious and state. I remember one person I read recently, they made a comment on my thing saying, what was it? The Constitution isn't the real law or code of the United States. It's the Bill of Rights. And, they were going on about number 2 about guns and stuff. And you're like, do you understand that the Bill of Rights can't stand without the Constitution? That like the amendments are founded upon the foundation of that thing. Have you read the Constitution lately?
As a constitutional attorney, I can assure you that the amendments actually amend the Constitution.
Do you understand what an amendment is? Wasn't there one of those crazies that also said it couldn't be amended or something? And you're like, no, that's what amendments are for.
That's the whole point. Yep.
Yeah.
Real quick on the Lauren Boebert part, because I've heard that argument so many times that I got frustrated. Separation of church and state isn't even in the Constitution. And if you want the best refutation of that, just Google it and then click on the link that's the au.org link. Is the separation of church and state in the Constitution? Google that and then click on the au.org link. And it's a very simple refutation. Bookmark it, copy, paste liberally. It shoots it all down.
Yeah, I started keeping a copy of it, and I reread the Constitution in 2020 before Biden's election. I was giving out copies for Christmas, little booklet copies. The one thing I love about all the journalists we have on the show is they keep a copy of them with them, and because they understand and honor what that document says. And of course, the freedom of the press is a very important factor of it. But they hold politicians to the feet, their feet to the fire of calling them out, and that right that they have to do so. And once we lose that right, once you can't speak out against religion or religious dominance, and what's really interesting, I don't know if you talk about this in the book, but what's really interesting is this isn't religious freedom for all religions either that these people are up to. Like, they're not like tolerant of other religions. Like, mine's going out the window, clearly. Atheist, I'll be burned at the stake first and put into the reconcentration camps for re-doctrinating myself.
I'll be right alongside you there too.
Will you? Okay, well, we're screwed. Yeah. And I don't think Jewish people, my good friends in the Jewish community, I don't think Judaism, it seems like they have some toxic attitudes towards Judaism. I think just about anything that isn't white, right wing, religious. I've had some authors that have suggested that Amy what's her face? The gal from Centers of National Policy, we mentioned her earlier, Betsy DeVos. Betsy DeVos's religion is very what's the word of the guy that she's really subscribed to? And it's a very violent sort of dominionist. Yeah, the dominionist. And who's the guy who's behind that? The Bible guy.
You think
Calvinism?
There is
it Calvinism?
I thought you were going for Rushdoony is where I thought you were going, but
be. I mean that guy too, from what I understand. Yeah, it's a kind of violent sort of like we're taking our will. It's not something where they're going to be like, okay, so all religions are good now and we're in control and the Bible is the new constitution. It's just going to be whatever their flavor of religion is.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right about that. And that's one of the crucial through lines that I tried to bring out in the book, because the ploy to capture the courts worked. Yeah. And we've actually been able to crunch the numbers. And then the studies that I'm going to give you the data on don't actually count for the last 2 terms, which were some of the biggest victories for the Crusaders. So the numbers are actually more dramatic now than what I'm going to say. But, before John Roberts was put on the Supreme Court, religion won about half the time at the court. And, that's kind of about what you would expect if you were going to guess. How often does religion win in these cases? About half the time. But under Roberts, that win rate jumps to 81%.
Wow.
And it's not just a pro-religion shift. It is a pro-Christian shift. So in the early courts, mainstream Christianity won 44% of the time. And by the time you get to John Roberts, that nearly doubles to 85% of the time.
Wow.
So, it should be plainly stated, right? The Supreme Court has been politicized. It has been packed. It is an extreme Christian wing of the Republican Party. And the new guiding principle of this Supreme Court is not the Constitution or the law, but simply this: Christianity wins.
And he tries to play a game with the balance of the court or the PR aspect of the balance of the court, doesn't he? Like he plays a game. Like sometimes he's like, I'll vote over here and I'll try and play like I'm the middle guy. Is that, like the perception he's trying to sell? Do I have that right?
You do. So I think the way to understand what John Roberts is trying to do is he wants the exact same conservative change that all of the other ultra conservatives on the court want. Their end goals are exactly the same. The difference is that Roberts understands that to have those changes stick depends on the legitimacy of the court. So what Roberts wants is the slowly boiled frog, and all the other justices are just chomping at the bit because Roberts knows
it's like,
they go too fast. Exactly. But Roberts himself is as much a crusader chosen for his ideology as any of the other ones. So, when we have, I've got him, and I talk about this in the books. We have briefs where he's arguing that public schools can impose religion on children at graduation ceremonies, and that Christian Bible clubs can use public schools to organize. And when he was in the Reagan White House, he supported a constitutional amendment that would allow public schools to impose Christian prayer on school children. And then there's this memo that he wrote, which he says, we still have an uphill battle to return prayer to schools.
Wow.
Right. We battle, return prayer to schools. Right. That is the language of a crusader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. It really is. You've given me some new light onto him because I've always been a little confused by him, where I'm like, is he on? Which side is he on? It seems like, he'll game the PR and perception a bit. And then, of course, he'll try and, present the court as being, but it seems like almost Clarence Thomas and maybe some of the other guys have kind of like, for a while there, he was like, oh, I keep everyone corralled and I keep everything legitimate and everything's above board. But it kind of seems like even Clarence Thomas is like, fuck it, we're doing whatever we want. Screw this guy. We're going,
and that's where we are now. That's where we are now, because like he, as the Chief Justice, he had a little bit more power and was able to do a little bit of the pumping the brakes. But now that there are 5 votes for the conservative change, we're going to check every item off the wish list. He can't stop them.
Wow. So it's just a fight over the power of the train, and he's kind of going like, we should just move slow and boil the frog slowly, and everyone's just like, nah, just throw that whole wrench that thing. Now that we're dominant on the thing. So
we have power, and by God damn it, we're going to use it, right? They're drunk on that power right now. The only question is whether, and this is maybe in the weeds for your listeners, but I think Roberts is very clearly leaning on Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett very hard to try to come around to his way of thinking. So he may succeed in like convincing one of them to do the slowly boiled frog thing, but otherwise, things are going to get a lot worse before they get better.
Do you see that coming up then? If at this point, when you look at the long game, and this is why, like I said, I appreciate people reading books like yours and what authors like yourself do in shining a light to this. People just think in the moment, like, and I deal with this on social media. You see people screaming, "Oh, men are bad because SCOTUS overturned stuff." It's like, no, you don't understand. You haven't been paying attention and voting for 40 years, and this is the result of that. And fixing this or balancing the court with people that maybe are more liberal or illiberal, is going to take time. And if Biden and the Democrats, I'm a moderate Democrat, full disclosure, if Biden doesn't take the Senate to where he can actually get judges put on to SCOTUS, if there becomes availability, I don't even know what the potential is for availability. If he doesn't get the Senate, they're not going to be able to start to try and at least balance the court. One question I have for you: how do you feel about this whole argument of expanding the court? I guess when the court was first established, it oversaw 9 different districts. Now there's 13, I guess. What do you think about that? And do you have any argument on either side?
Yeah. So, I mean, first, I think you're absolutely right that people should get over the instant gratification attempts to fix everything in our society, right? Like they played a long game, they captured the highest court in the land. It took 5 decades. We're not going to overturn that in a couple days. We also need to, by the way, shatter the myth that the judicial system is going to fix it for us. That there's a silver bullet for our side. We have to organize and message in ways that build power, and that's one of the things that American Crusade seeks to do. And I do get into concrete solutions in the end of the book. None of them are quick or easy. I do offer expanding the Supreme Court as a solution. So yes, I mean the Supreme Court, first of all, has changed sides 7 times in our history. That's by legislation, so that's about every 34 years on average. And then it's changed size other times too. Mitch McConnell changed the size of this court. He dropped it from 9 down to 8 for an entire court term for 422 days.
That's true.
When it suited his political ends, he was perfectly fine with changing the size of the Supreme Court. He had no problem with it. And then he bumped it back up to 9 when it was also suited his political ends. And to me, like, this is the point. The Supreme Court has already been packed.
Yeah,
that has already happened, and they did that not because they just wanted their people in there who are going to make these decisions and do it right. They didn't spend that $540 million. They didn't cheat and steal and pack the courts to put their collaborators in place because they would administer justice even-handedly. They did it because they wouldn't administer justice even-handedly.
These guys were crusaders, as you said.
Yeah, they know the outcomes they were getting. So to me, the question is, like, forget about the fact that, yes, it's nice that there are 13 circuits. Like, they did this on purpose to reverse engineer these decisions, and they stole these seats. That cannot stand. The institute, like, I know there are a lot of the institutionalists out there who are like, oh, you could never, you're politicizing the court. It's already politicized. That's true. That's what they did. That's the whole point of what they were doing.
Because there's some people that have said, if you change the court, you're politicizing it, or you're doing that to affect the legitimacy, and you bring a good argument. Yeah,
and it's just, it fails to recognize where we are at this point in time.
Yeah, and how we got here.
Yeah. So to me, that is one of the solutions, and it took me a while to get around to that solution, actually, but I'm fully on board now. And it's not just we should expand it because the court's overworked. I mean, then Mitch McConnell turns around and says, "Oh, well, fine, we'll add 4 justices." Like, we need to expand it to rebalance it and punish the people who tried to steal it for political ends, so that does not happen again. This is the way to depoliticize the court, to make it not a political football, right? And remember, our entire constitutional order is based on checks and balances. We have the 3 different branches of government, and if any one of them gets too out of control, too drunk on power, it is up to the other 2 branches, in this case Congress and the president, to check the 3rd branch. And that is what needs to happen right now. I mean, the Supreme Court needs to get smacked around, politically speaking.
Yeah, there's a lot of cases. You cite cases in your book. There's a lot of cases that have made it so that politically they can, Citizens United and all sorts of different cases where basically, you can have an oligarchy that buys buys justices, that buys presidencies, that buys politicians. It's really crazy what's going on. And like you say, it takes time, and it's going to take us time to repair this. I mean, even if Biden wanted to expand, or the Senate wanted to expand the court, that would have to be a law, wouldn't it? Wouldn't we have to pass a law, and then that would probably go to the Supreme Court to decide if it was going to pass?
Well, so I mean that's one of the reasons I think that it is one of the more attractive solutions, actually, because like things like term limits and things like ethics rules, I think we should try those, but those are definitely going to be the people who are going to decide whether or not those are constitutional are the same justices whose power we're trying to check.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's almost like they're becoming the president of the country.
Yeah.
And then people don't realize it is a boiling of the frog, where you're slowly seeing your rights dissolved. Whether it's privacy rights, First Amendment rights, now it's abortion and religion. What next? We were just watching Dr. Oz on TV talk about how the only people who should be involved in the conversation of abortion should be your doctor, yourself, and local politicians.
Yeah, that's who you
local
want.
Politicians are crazy. I mean, beside Lauren Boebert and some of the extremists aside, who's the other gal who's kind of off the wall there?
Marjorie
Taylor Greene. Set a few of those aside. There's some people in the Senate that, regardless of what side you're on, they seem to have at least something going on. I don't know if you address in your book at all the age too of our politicians and the people that are on the court. It's almost, do you talk at all about maybe we need an age cap or term limits on the court?
Well, and so that's one of the things why expanding, I think, is a preferable solution, because the Constitution itself lays out how long justices get to serve. And the words are "shall hold their offices during good behavior." And that's in the Constitution. So that's why that's what that has been interpreted to mean, a lifetime appointment. Whereas the Constitution does not set the number of justices. It says that Congress gets to do that. So there's, for instance, right now there's a bill up, the Judiciary Act, HR 2584, I believe it is, which changes the number of justices. It just changes in 8 associate justices to 12 associate justices.
Wow.
And just changes the word 8 to the word 12. That's it. And all you have to do is pass that law, and then you've got it, and then you confirm the judges. Whereas and there are some really creative, I will say this, really creative ways to try to get around the constitutional lifetime appointment. So for instance, the people would still be on the court, but they'd have senior status, or they would rotate off of active duty, or there would be heavy incentives for them to retire, or you would just keep adding people to the court every couple years. So that each president gets, X number of appointments, and that lessens the desire to capture any single appointment politically, and also encourages retirement more. So, I mean, there are creative ways to do it, but I think expansion is the easiest and simplest.
And this is the way that fascists and authoritarians take rule. Whether it's Russia or Brazil, or name any other country where there's been a rise, when you can get the court to rubber stamp whatever an authoritarian wants to do, they can seize power. I mean, the court was one of the few things standing between Nixon when he when he tried to cite that he had control of his tapes and stuff. And thankfully, for a lot of their rulings, they held up against a lot of what Trump was trying to do. But, now where we've seen the court stacked, I mean, anything's up for whatever. I mean, they overturned Roe versus Wade as a precedent. What else is next?
Well, and I mean, that's, I think, a really important question, because there is no amount of power or privilege that is going to satisfy the Crusaders.
Wow.
The end of Roe is just the beginning. In a way. I mean, they're coming for contraception. They're coming for marriage equality. They're coming for everything. And the point,
the Brown ruling, the school ruling.
A lot of this really does begin with Brown versus Board of Education, which I get into in the book. But I think the key thing to do, and this is one of if only one thing happens from this book, I'd be happy with it, is that we have to unshackle our minds from the myth of the Supreme Court as a defender of the downtrodden, as this impartial arbiter of truth and justice. You mentioned, the court checking Nixon, and the court had some really good years in there, like the Warren Court. It gave us Brown versus Board of Education. It gave us Gideon versus Wainwright, which lets you it says you have a right to an attorney if you're accused of a crime, right?
Yeah.
But that is the historical outlier for our Supreme Court. Really, the Supreme Court is a regressive, conservative body. I mean, this is the court of Plessy versus Ferguson and separate is equal, of Dred Scott and fugitive slave laws, of trying to suffocate the New Deal in the cradle, of gutting the power of the 14th Amendment that was won with the blood of so many Americans during the Civil War. I mean, this is the court of Japanese internment camps and of Muslim bans and of billionaires and corporations and political gerrymandering and vote suppression. And now, as you said, of abolishing abortion and reproductive freedom in the name of their narrow religious beliefs. Yeah. So we really do have to unshackle our minds from that myth, because that myth is one thing that gives this crusade a lot of power.
And there are GOP people who said the quiet part out loud, overturning Brown. I can't remember who said it, but they mentioned that. I think someone even joked about overturning the Miranda rights. This is returning us to a Christian white nationalist sort of nation. I mean, these people want to drag us back to the 50s and to the era of huge racism and what's the era I'm thinking of, post Lincoln and the era where they enacted all the laws, the Jim Crow laws. There we go. That's what I'm trying to think of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right, and I mean this court. This is so focused on originalism and history and tradition, and it is because of exactly what you just identified. This court is focused on history and tradition because it wants to drag us back to a time when conservative white Christian men ruled and everybody else was second-class citizens.
Yep.
And one of the ways they're trying to do that is by weaponizing religious freedom. Truly.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, one of my final questions for you. Great discussion so far. We've been going on for a while here, and it's a topic that deserves exposure. What do you think should happen to Justice Thomas? This guy's clearly compromised. I mean, I don't think you can be any more compromised than Clarence Thomas at this point, especially with his wife's involvement with January 6th and I mean, just some of the crazy stuff you've seen in text messages. Do we need to? What's the right word for this? To impeach him? To claw him back? What way can Congress claw him back, and should he be clawed back, do you think?
Well, I mean, the only way, right? Justices retain their post during good behavior. The only way to get a justice off the Supreme Court is if they die, they voluntarily retire, or they are impeached. And look, I mean, think about the political capital that the other side spent to put Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett on the court. I mean, think about what they expended to get Kavanaugh on the court over these credible accusations. And don't forget Kavanaugh screaming that the Democrats were going to pay for what they did to him, reap the whirlwind. I mean, they spent everything they could to pack the courts. And then they protected, of all people, Trump when he was up for impeachment. The idea that they would not do infinitely more for the justices who they spent all this capital to give lifetime appointments to is ludicrous to me. I mean, so I think that the best solution is to immediately put in some binding ethics rules on the Supreme Court. Now, there is an open question on whether the court would accept those rules, whether the justices would, but it also ought to extend to their families. I think that's a crucial part. Like John Roberts's wife is a legal recruiter. She's this high-powered legal recruiter, and of course, that gives her an entree into all manner of law firms and things like that in Washington D.C. society. Amy Coney Barrett's husband is a lawyer in Indiana, and that law firm in Indiana just happened to open a branch in DC all of a sudden, and he's going to be helping run it, and we're not sure what he's going to be doing. There needs to be not just transparency from the justices themselves, radical transparency, but also for the families and the other immediate people in their life who could benefit from them deciding these cases. And I mean, I think Ginny Thomas and Clarence Thomas, and I do get into, and it's even worse than I think people realize or know. I get into that in both the book itself, American Crusade, and the update. So I think we're in a little bit of a crisis when it comes to them.
Definitely. And even like you mentioned, the attorneys and some of the incestuous things with the attorneys and the law firms. We had David Enrich on with his book Servants of the Damned, talking about Jones Day and some of these other law firms that have been really helpful to the conservative right. There's a saber rattling going on that we've talked about, where there's the threat of violence and the talk of civil war. And I don't see an official civil war going on, because Americans are a little too busy with their radial tires and, leave me with my lazy boy recliners and that whole pitch from Network, the movie from the 70s. But there's a point where we need to go yell out our window. I'm sick and tired of it. We're not taking it. But it's almost like this placating where Biden and Democrats are going, should we force the 13 people on the SCOTUS, or is that going to invoke violence? There is a time on the train that we're on that violence and taking violence is going to happen. We're already seeing assholes with guns hanging out at voting mail-in ballot boxes, and I think it's Arizona, where we're seeing armed men at the things. We saw armed men showing up at the 2020 hearing. There is a point where this breaks, and enough militias and people, we saw January 6th. Where violence, I had, I can't remember the radio host who came on the show, Tom Hartman. He's been on about 5 or 6 times now, but he came on after January 6th and he says, what they call January 6th? Well, and I go, what? And he goes, a warm up. And I about fell off my chair at a rehearsal. And so violence is going to come to us in spite of all the saber rallying that's going on. Well, maybe we shouldn't mess with Clarence Thomas. The time to do is now. The time to vote is now.
Yeah,
and
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I have a bad feeling. It looks like we might take the Senate. I don't know. The numbers are getting narrower, and people just don't get it, man. They're just like, they're in this mode where everybody elects fascists because the trains run on time, until they don't, and then the corruption, the greed, and the graft, and it just gets so overwhelming that eventually the trains don't run on time, and then everything goes to hell, and they try and moderate the economy, and then you end up with Venezuela, which is people see countries like that and they go, well, they just got a bad guy. No, they had a series of bad guys that slowly tweaked and twerked the system. So anyway, I'm glad your book is exposing this and light to it. One of the other final things I wanted to get in here, on the Amazon listing, it mentions one of my favorite orators and debaters, Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
The book is a stand-up for the shelf of fans of Michelle Alexander, Bob Woodward, and it also mentions our good friend Kristen Dumais, who wrote the book Jesus and John Wayne. Mm-hmm. She's been on the show a couple times. And do you ever hang out with Sam, our good friend Sam Perry? I think it is Sam.
Yeah. So Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead, and a couple of other folks who I've worked really closely with and I consider friends, helped me put together that report on Christian nationalism and the role that it played in the January 6th insurrection, which is, when you started talking about violence, like that's immediately where, like, I've watched so many hours of footage for that report that we produced, and I helped spearhead along with Sam. Yeah, so Sam Perry's a good friend. We've been doing he's doing a lot of the studying of Christian nationalism and exposing it, and I'm doing a lot of the fighting it on the front lines. So he and I chat on the regular.
That's awesome. He's brilliant. And you're brilliant too for coming and shining a light on this. And I'm just glad that there's a group of people that are in the religious segment that are, I don't think you're in the religious segment. I think
I'm an atheist like you.
You're an atheist. But I'm glad there's a lot of people inside that building calling it out and going, hey, there's craziness going on. I think we've had Sam on twice. We've had the guy from PRR.
Robert Jones, PRI.
He's been on. And so I'm glad there's people in there going, hey, let's take this back. But sometimes it almost feels like they're just what's her face from Wyoming, who was on the January 6th committee. They're like the Liz Cheneys. And you're like, you decided to call the ball way too late. And now you're trying to call it back, and it may have gotten loose.
I mean, I think when you're fighting fascism and authoritarianism, shared values matter more than shared beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that is, I think, one of the things that we really have to focus on when we face an existential threat like white Christian nationalism, which really is what we are facing right now. And I mean, it is that the entire goal of that movement is to give power and privilege to conservative white Christians and make everybody else a second-class citizen. And our country really is on fire. Our democracy isn't slipping away. It's being stolen. The republic is being strangled. And those of us who share values like equality and justice and truth and fairness must come together to stop the arsonist, the thief, the murderer. And that means fighting Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
So I really do value those friendships that have come out of that.
Yeah. And people need to realize that when you vote, when you guys go to vote, you need to understand how important this is. I'm reading a lot of voters' attitudes where they're like, well, I'm more concerned about inflation. Like I said, the train's running on time. And my pocketbook. Well, maybe you should be more worried about your freedom first, because your freedom affects your pocketbook in the end when the trains don't run on time. And
even if you're not, inflation is not being caused by economic policies, but by corporate greed. And the only party that's taken that on are not the Republicans. I mean, I like to tell people that voting is literally the least you can do.
Yeah.
Voting does not solve anything. It is not a magic bullet. It gives us an opportunity to fix things. Stacey
Exactly.
Abrams says that it's not magic, it's medicine. You have to do it. I've always liked that.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, people ask what political side I'm on these days. I've moved from a liberal. I was a George Bush guy, Republican back before 2000, before 9/11. I saw what he did and the religious effect that he had, the religious right had with him, and I left the party. I left the party because I thought he was an idiot, and I was tired of Dick Cheney running this country. Can you imagine what I saw as Trump? I'm like, I tell my Republican friends, I'm like, I left because George Bush Jr. was an idiot, or I thought he was an idiot. He looks actually pretty smart now.
Trump was the best thing to ever happen to him.
Yeah, kind of. He's him and Nixon. Like Nixon's like, hey, at least Nixon respected our Constitution and resigned. He didn't even have to get impeached. There was just the threat of it. But no, it's crazy what's going on, and people need to realize. I see this all the time on Facebook and TikTok and every place, especially after the Roe overturning. A lot of people with their hair on fire, and I'll put in the comments. I'll put like, hey, this is a great post of hating on men or blaming whoever you're blaming for this. But are you registered to vote this coming election? And it's always crickets. Or it's like, no, it doesn't matter, something like that. And it's like, hey, you can make all the Facebook posts you want. But if you're not registered to vote, I showed up and voted for Hillary. Okay, I didn't put us in this. Okay, everybody out there knows and was like, open her emails and stuff. You're just like, hey, you got us here. You're the person who got us here. So there's that.
Well, anyway, can I just say too? Because
ahead,
as a constitutional attorney, I've spent a lot of time looking at voting rights and watching the Supreme Court also dismiss. You could write a book like American Crusade about voting rights, and it's been written. I mean, the other side is spending so much goddamn time trying to take away your right to vote. Yeah. If you let apathy do that for them, I mean, you're just giving the game away.
Yeah, and we've given it away. That's how we got here. So you need to fight. You need to fight. We saw what happened in 2020. I mean, the game they were playing, even the day guy, what's his name, who was running the U.S. Postal Service. The federal judges have finally ruled against him and put some constraints on him. Why he's still in that position, I have no idea. But everything they did. I mean, between Kemp, kind of sliding the Georgia governor's election with the games he played with the voting booths and stuff, it was crazy.
Do you remember that Paul Weyrich quote?
No, I don't.
So, I mean, for people who don't know, Paul Weyrich was, he gave the moral majority its name. He founded it with Jerry Falwell. They chose abortion as the wedge issue for American politics. He founded ALEC. He founded the Heritage Foundation. And he gave this speech in, I think it was 1980, to this huge gathering of preachers. Phyllis Schlafly was there, Tim LaHaye, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, and Ronald Reagan. And Weyrich says, I don't want everyone to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in elections quite candidly goes up as the voting population goes down. And the our in that infamous quote was Christians.
Wow. And I mean, that's what they did during the Jim Crow eras. They didn't want everybody voting. We didn't really become a democracy until Black people got the right to vote. And, up until then, we were pretty much, I mean, even the Constitution was written for landholders and men. Yeah. So, they kind of threw something in there like, we should probably have equal rights for everybody, but we'll run with this for now. But no, it's people need to realize their rights are dissolving under SCOTUS. And this thing doesn't, and it's not enough just to be like, oh, those guys suck, and making posts on Facebook. Anyway, thank you very much for coming on the show, Andrew. We really appreciate it. Give us your plugs.com so people can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I could have gone for another hour with you.
I know we could go for hours on
this. So yeah, I'm Andrew L. Seidel everywhere. That's AndrewLSeidel. That's my handle on all the socials. That's my .com. I work for Americans United for Separation of Church and State, AU.org. And I'll say this, if you want a signed copy of American Crusade, which I think makes a fantastic gift, especially for the liberal in your life, or even the conservative who wants to learn something, if you go to bit.ly/signed-AC, SIGNED-AC, like Signed American Crusade, you can get a copy. I've partnered with a local bookstore here in Madison, Wisconsin, and every week I go in and sign a bunch of books, and I can personalize it too if you leave a note during the checkout. So it's a great way to give somebody a gift for the upcoming holidays.
There you go. And the upcoming election too. Pass out the book, pass out the data, share, give the book to a bunch of friends. People need to realize, what's really going on in the long game. Mm-hmm. And even like what you talked about earlier, it's going to take longer to fix this thing.
Oh yeah.
Is there anybody up in the next 2 years of Biden's presidency, if we won the Senate, that we could, is there any availabilities coming up with?
Not that we know of. But unless we can expand the court, which I think we desperately need to do. That's the surest way to stop the bleeding. But again, it takes a Senate majority and a House majority to do that.
Does it take the House too? Oh yeah, because it would be a law. That's
pass
right.
The law. Yeah.
But even SCOTUS appointments can just be done in the Senate, right?
Correct. So once you get once you pass the law, then the appointments are just Senate and President.
And I keep telling it to people. I'm like, we have to have a majority in the Senate, or else you're not going to get new justices. So you're going to be stuck with what you got there.
You're not going to get new judges, period. Right. Yeah. I mean, like we talk about the Supreme Court, but like McConnell didn't just block Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland, but every other federal judge. I think Obama got one federal judge through in the last 2 years of his term. And then all of those justices were filled, or all of those judgeships were filled by Trump, which is why like between a quarter and a third of the federal judiciary are Trump judges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a picture I keep posting. It's of Chris Farley doing his SNL bit of Down by the River, the motivational speaker guy, where he screams at the kids, and there's a picture of him Photoshop next to Merrick Garland, like, arrest somebody already. And it's really important that he upholds the law of the land, that no one is above the law. Yeah, let's charge a president, or an ex-president, I should say, or somebody thinks he's president. Maybe that's the joke. But no, man. I mean, it's going to be interesting. It's always that smoking gun. It's the lie that catches you. And something as stupid as him keeping classified documents in Florida.
Yeah.
If that's the one thing that I don't care what gets him. It's the same thing with OJ, and he gets away with murder, but then some bullshit he pulls in my city of Las Vegas sends him away for 10 years. I don't care what gets you, but hopefully something goes down with that. But yeah, I think even just offsetting SCOTUS for 13 people is it's gonna cause problems, and the religious right's gonna go more crazy. But more and more using books like yours, we need to identify who the problem is in the room and go, it's those guys over there. Because I get tired of the Roe versus Wade thing. We're going, men are bad, men are stupid. And I'm like, you don't understand. All those men legislatures got conservative wives, like Clarence Thomas's wife. And
Well, I mean, if people pick up the book and read it and come away thinking like we definitely need to expand the Supreme Court, like that's the solution, I'd be thrilled.
there you go. Mail copy to Biden.
Yeah, there you go.
You've got me sold on it. I was kind of on the fence, like, I don't know, man. But you've got me sold on it now, so you converted me.
Great.
Anyway, thanks for coming on, Andrew. We really appreciate it. Great
My
discussion.
pleasure. Thank you.
There you go. Guys, go pick up the book. Give it to your friends, family, and relatives. Get people registered to vote. If you really want to change what the Supreme Court's doing, you need to realize the long game and all that good stuff. Available September 27th, 2022, for those of you watching this 10 years from now. American Crusade. Hopefully it's a democracy by then, or or else you'll be in that final scene of Planet of the Apes where Charlton Heston comes upon and says, "Damn it, you idiots." American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. Order up wherever fine books are sold. Thanks, Monis, for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. All of our groups and activity on LinkedIn. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss and see our new stuff over there on TikTok. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time. Man.